Considering the fact that Canada has been one of the most prosperous countries in modern history, many outside hoping to get into Canada will be taken by surprise. After all, many have looked forward to finally making it to America's colder yet friendlier and more polite neighbor up north. Who doesn't want to visit the country's snowy plains and its busy cities? Such is the reputation of Canada that many consider it to be the safe paradise others would have hoped the United States of America would be. That's why many would rather go over there than to settle in the US of A. Like really, who could actually say no to universal health care? Unfortunately, in the present day, Canada isn't living up to its stellar reputation. If it isn't the homeless people littering the streets in some of its biggest cities, just like some of the major cities in the neighbor down south, and even in some of the smaller towns that had never experienced homelessness before, it's the ever-rising crime rate that's imprinting fear on the people who had always felt safe in their streets and in their public transport systems. Even the universal healthcare system is collapsing as medical professionals are slowly losing the battle against the amount of people that need their help, as people are forced to wait for months so that they could get treatment. Things are so dire now that the country is also losing the battle against opioids, just like their neighbors eventually had to surrender during its war against drugs. So how and why could this almost perfect country slump to such a state of despair and disrepair? Maybe even more troubling, why does it look like things are about to get worse before they get better? Join us as we take a look at why Canada's economy is failing. Canada. Truth be told, Canada is a country that has been given a better chance than most to succeed. While being the second largest sovereign state in the world in terms of land mass, it also has a relatively small population of about 40 million people when compared to its land mass and other countries as well. I mean, there are almost as many people in the state of California. With this massive landmass, Canada has been able to thrive thanks to the natural resources such a large country has had at its disposal. Ever since it was colonized by the French before the British decided to hop on board with them, Canada has been functioning as a resource economy as it initially thrived in the fur trade before participating in logging and fishing. Things went up a notch when Canada embarked on succeeding in the oil and hydroelectricity industry. Thanks to the oil fields of Alberta and the hydro dams of Quebec, Canada was able to grow with these industries, as well as the large factories and the other industries that were thriving within the snowy borders of this great country. Furthermore, the nation was supplemented by the branches of major companies from the US that decided to do business in Canada. Truly, the future looked bright as the likes of Ford and General Motors built their camps in Canada. Unfortunately, despite all these things going for them, Canada's economy looks like it's about to go through something very undesirable. Recent reading shows that not only is Canada enduring poverty relative to other successful countries and in objective terms, in fact, OECD, that is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is an intergovernmental organization with 38 member countries that was established in 1961 to stimulate economic progress and world trade, released a recent forecast which said that in the course of the next 3 decades, Canada is set to have the slowest growing economy among the 38 member states of the intergovernmental organization. This is a far contrast to Canada's condition a generation ago. In fact, back then, it was considered to be among the wealthiest and fastest-growing countries in the intergovernmental group and the world as a whole. As the country plummets to the bottom of the barrel, some experts point to some factors which they blame for the fall of this once great nation. The productivity of Canada's workforce seems to be one of the major reasons for Canada's fall. After all, if you ask any economist with such a title, they'd tell you that productivity is the key element that drives the wealth of an economy. In fact, productivity is so important that it is one of the key measures of how much output an economy can produce. It might actually be as simple as this. The more output each worker produces, the more wealth there is likely to be in a country. In the past, Canada could actually boast of being as productive as America. However, according to some surveys carried out today, it looks like Canada's workforce is being outproduced by their neighbors down south by a factor of 40%. As a result, it seems that this may be responsible for the fact that Canadians earn less than Americans, as the average salary of an American is said to be around $57,000, while the salary of an average Canadian is less than $44,000. For those wondering why this may be, as in why this fall in productivity might be taking place, they can find the answers when they realize that Canada has stopped making things. Unbelievably, it seems like they decided to focus their economy on buying and selling homes. Understandably, this can make onlookers think that Canada went from being backed up by an economy based on its resources to one that looks like a Ponzi scheme where the citizens of Canada are scrambling to buy overpriced homes. Some trace the beginning of these problems back to the global financial crisis of 2008. Back then, Canada seemed exempt from the housing crisis because the homes over there didn't suffer like the ones in the US and in the UK. Instead, Canada seemed to be able to sustain its banks without any need for bailouts. However, when the World Central Bank began to drop its interest rates so that it could add some much-needed oomph to the global economy, Canada's central bank decided to follow this initiative by reducing its interest rates to almost nothing. As you can imagine, this was quite tempting for those eager to join the housing market as mortgages became extremely cheap and easy to borrow. This demand for mortgages and homes proved to be a bad thing for this economy because the cost of homes in Canada began to increase without control. At that time, the percentage of homeowners in Canada was as high as 70%, and with this feeling of newfound wealth, these homeowners decided to take more risks in the housing markets. Feeling invincible to the crash of their neighbor's housing market, they didn't realize trouble was brewing as the homes in major cities like Toronto and Vancouver began to rise by double digits each year. I wonder how someone could actually stomach such a reality. It's like one of those memes where some dude is lamenting about playing Pokemon at the age of 9 instead of investing in the housing market. I understand exactly what you mean, bro. I'm sure these people thought they were in the midst of a huge housing bubble. I wonder how they must have felt when this bubble never popped. By 2014, trouble began to brew when the global oil price was devalued by 50% within the space of a year. As you can imagine, this must have been a shock to the system to Canada, whose most lucrative export was, you guessed it, oil. This must have been the major catalyst that brought about the deviation from the investments in oil in favor of investments in real estate. This must have seemed like a great move because Canada was always welcoming to immigrants, so there was always a need to build more homes. Aside from that, more Canadians were also investing their own money into buying homes as well. No surprise, this limited the amount of investment that went into other business sectors. Alarmingly, this trend hasn't come to an end ever since. In fact, recently, the amount of money going into real estate has even surpassed the money that's going into other business sectors in the country as a whole. Insane, right? As you can imagine, this is bad news. For starters, this has created a problem in that a lack of investment in other business ventures means that there aren't any new businesses that are being created at all. As if that isn't bad enough, those that are already in existence are being bought by companies in the US. Even worse still, not only are the businesses not being invested in, but the people also in the businesses are being left out. Well, at least when compared to the workers in other countries. For example, the investment in workers living in the US is now almost double of that which is invested in those in Canada. While this may be considered to be another reason for the workers' fall in productivity, another thing that this lack of investment in the workers is causing is that their equipment they use are also older and sometimes outdated. This can easily lead to exactly what is happening right now. Canadians are falling behind. As bad as the fall in productivity and the deviation from a resource-driven economy in favor of the real estate market might be, it still isn't as bad as learning that Canada's poor choice has caused the tripling of the housing market since 2010. While those who are already homeowners must be loving this, the same can't be said by the members of the younger generation who are trying to secure homes for themselves. Let's not even talk about the effects of COVID on the housing market. During COVID, the Bank of Canada decided to drop interest rates to almost 0% again. As people scurried to buy homes for themselves, the price of homes doubled within 2020 and 2023, and that was even before inflation hit the nation. Once global inflation hit Canada, the central bank of the nation decided to increase interest rates, and this was devastating to those who fell from this trap. You see, unlike the US, where mortgages can last for a duration of 30 years with a fixed interest rate, Canadians have mortgages that last 5 years, following which such mortgages are renewed with new interest rates. While some can stick to a fixed interest rate for those years, others can subject themselves to the whim of a market that could rise or fall at any given time. With the variable interest rates being lower than that of the fixed one during the pandemic, many opted for the variable interest rates. I'm sure that must have looked like a terrible choice when those interest rates went up. As terrible as that may seem, even those with fixed interest rates experienced some problems because even their rates were subject to increases when they had to renew their own 5-year mortgages. Spotting a huge problem with this method, the Canadian Central Bank decided to solve this problem by allowing the homeowners to amortize their mortgages. Although this reduced the cost of monthly payments, a huge problem this method presented was that now Canadians may spend up to 70 or 80 years trying to buy their homes. What a reality! What a nightmare! The situation is so dire that only people who are already homeowners and corporations seem to be the only ones capable of buying homes in Canada. That actually means that right now, only 10% of Canadians can afford to buy a home today. This must be why the percentage of homeowners today has fallen from 70% a decade ago to 66.5% today, and it's only gonna keep falling. The problem is made even worse by the expectation of the arrival of many immigrants into Canada. With the expectation of about 500,000 immigrants coming into the country every year, Canada's population is growing at a speedy rate of about 1 million people per annum, which makes it one of the countries with the fastest growing population right now. As you can guess, Canada may not be economically ready for this growth spurt. In fact, this has resulted in a recent per capita recession, even though the economy is still growing, albeit at a slower rate than it would like. What can you expect from an economy that decided to invest in a crashing real estate sector rather than in its resources? Now, there aren't enough jobs to sustain its citizens. No surprise, this rapid growth that Canada's population has experienced has created a strain for its once highly regarded healthcare system. Despite welcoming in as many as 1 million immigrants and new citizens per year, Canada hasn't considered it fit to employ any of the doctors coming in from these countries because they do not recognize foreign medical credentials. One would be more shocked by such a stance when you hear that Canada lost a good number of doctors during the pandemic, either due to the stress of working under such stressful conditions or due to their disagreement with the mandates of the government-run healthcare system. Complementing this with the lack of an influx of construction workers who would help with the building of homes for Canada's new immigrants, Canada is also struggling to build any new homes for its ever-growing population. So, you won't be surprised to learn that this has also caused an increase in the renting situation. In the past year alone, the rent in Toronto has gone up by 30%. No doubt, this can be said to be a direct cause of the present homelessness that is taking place today. In order to curb such a problem, a lot of investments, in fact, billions of dollars worth of it, must go into the housing market to begin solving this problem. Even worse, the government may have to step in with a policy that would curb the power of the landlords. Furthermore, nobody is brave enough to curb the immigration rates that's taking place in the country. Can Canada solve its problems? We don't know. All we can say is that this once great country has a lot of work to do in order to avoid a catastrophic slump. With that, this video has come to an end. Canada isn't the only country going through it. What do we mean? Take a look at this video that takes a look at China's crumbling economic story. Not your speed? Why don't you take a look at Africa's $5 billion megadam that will block the Nile? Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, goodbye.